Hello, everyone. So, we are going to be talking about the book Palestine 1936, blah, 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 by Oren Kessler. And actually, I heard an interview with him, and he said that the book should be called Palestine 1936 to 1939, which actually, to me, this is a big difference between just saying Palestine 1936. The reason why he didn't call the book 1936 to 1939 is the publisher didn't want a long, complicated name like that. But by saying 1936 to 1939, this changes the idea. I thought that this book would be about a single event, but it's not, obviously. If it's from 1936 to 1939, this is going to be about a political movement, something akin to the intifadas that happened much later. So, with that in mind, I want to give context. I want to give a very broad overview of the Middle East during this time. And the book also gives context, but I want to give even broader context. If you really want to get into it, you can watch my previous video about Sykes-Picot and the formation of the modern Middle East during World War I and what happened as the Ottoman Empire fell apart or didn't fall apart. But now this is going to be about what happened after the Ottoman Empire disappeared. And a lot happened. A lot of crazy stuff happened. Really, really crazy stuff. We look at Israel and Palestine and we think, oh, this one little tiny sliver of a country on the map, this is where all the crazy stuff happens. But then also you look at Iraq, you look at Syria, but this kind of crazy stuff has been going on since the Ottoman Empire broke up. And as you can imagine, this is really intense to have an empire that's been around for hundreds of years, that encompasses many, many different kinds of people, very, very different kinds of people, Armenians and Turks, Kurds, Assyrians, Arabs, and Jews, many who are also Arab actually in this area, and many, many other people. And suddenly that fabric, that quilt has it all connected, just completely unravels. And now they're left to their own devices. And with modern weaponry and with political influence from outside, and with, for the most part, France and England trying to conquer them again. So it's a really, really crazy time. And this is the time when the Jews start coming to this area as well, making it even more unstable. But before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is the heart of Palestine. By the way, when I talk about Palestine, I don't mean it in the modern context of Israel versus Palestine. I'm talking about the geographic area, which at the time was called Palestine. It was never exactly a country, so I wouldn't say the country of Palestine. At one point it was a mandate, but it's really easy if you just say it was an area. Also, what I'm going to say is going to be not 100% true. Sometimes I oversimplify things. There's a lot of numbers that are just totally impossible to actually know, like population movements and things like that. If I ever give anything about an amount of people, just know that I'm lying to you. This is just the best I can do. And I honestly don't care. Like, if it's 700,000 people, 800,000 people, does it really matter that much? In this lead up to this book, no, it doesn't matter that much. So, yeah, another thing that I'm not going to do is I'm not going to cite my sources that much because normally I have to. And this is just a book club. And I'm really, really happy to be free not to work really hard and cite my sources. But I did do a lot of research for this and just take everything, not just with what I say, but with what anyone says about Israel and Palestine with a lot of salt. So, first of all, about Jerusalem, this is not a peaceful area. It has the word peace in it, but that doesn't mean. I think of the peace in Jerusalem kind of like the Democratic Republic of North Korea has the word democratic in it. It's one of those things. Jerusalem is one of the most violent, historically violent places to have ever existed. It's been destroyed completely 2 times. It's been besieged 23 times. It's been captured and recaptured 44 times and 52 times attacked. So the people or peoples of this city in during different times have been through a lot. Not in their lifetime, but culturally, they've been through a lot. And I don't know if this has anything to do with why the city is so crazy, but man, this is not a peaceful place. So, all right, something interesting is this guy, I wrote it down here, Useful Charts. He did a whole video, and he has a great website as well, about who controlled Jerusalem the longest. So, Islamic people have been in control of Jerusalem for 1,283 years, at least at the time of the video. That includes today, by the way. He's including the time of today because East Jerusalem is controlled by Islam or Islamic people. Judaism also, this many years, Christianity also. Then he made, in the same video, he talked about how long these different groups of people have controlled Jerusalem. So, for example, the Romans, 683 years. He said the Judahites, these are really ancient people that might have come from like the Canaanites. This is really, really ancient history. He made it exactly 414 years. I don't know if anyone could know that exact amount. And the Ottomans for 401 years. So if you count these two, this area has been controlled by empires for a really long time and been fought over, as you can see here, a lot. This website is really great, by the way. Website and YouTube channel, Useful Charts. He's a really cool guy. Okay, coming to modern times now. I made a whole timeline that starts, well, it starts in 1919, really. I want to talk a little bit about before, because there was some census data before 1919, in 1914, and you have these numbers here. So 70,000 Christians, 94,000 Jews, and 525,000 Muslims. And I don't know if this, I don't know for what area, for Palestine in some general sense, these people lived there. It's pretty much the same amount of Christians, Jews, and Muslims in 1922, after World War I. Actually, the amount of Jews actually decreases just a little bit. But again, these numbers, like who knows where these numbers are actually coming from? They are not to be. I wouldn't. I wouldn't write these numbers in stone. And then something interesting happens in 1936. So the numbers go up a lot for everyone, but especially for the Jews. So here it's almost 600,000 Muslims. It goes to 750,000 Muslims, so it definitely increases the population of Muslims. But the population of Jews almost doubles, and that's in 1931. As we see in the timeline, the population of Jews will really, really, really increase a lot, very rapidly, thanks to Hitler, basically. So, let's get started with this timeline. And again, I made this timeline in the context of Palestine. It's a very Palestine-centered timeline, and I really took care to try to make it about, try to have a balance about what's happening really far in the outside world, what's happening more in the Arab world and the Middle East in general, and really, really hone down to what exactly is happening in the Levant area of the former Ottoman Empire. And the Levant area is this area. It's Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and Jordan, and also definitely Palestine as well is in the Levant area. Okay, so let's get started. So this is the beginning of my timeline. It's the end of World War I. World War I ends. The Ottoman Empire is finished. There is no more Ottoman Empire. Actually, technically, that's not true, as you'll see later on in the timeline, but it's basically true. The British take the Levant area besides Syria and Lebanon. The French take Syria and Lebanon, and they want to take a lot of Turkey as well. Um, they have a lot going on though, so they don't do all that quite yet. One thing that is not talked about very much in the history of the Middle East and the history of the Levant area, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, is that there was an Armenian genocide that happened while the Ottoman Empire was flickering out. And this was a really big deal. Maybe no one really knows how many people were killed. Maybe, let's just say 1 million at the very least were killed. And a lot of Armenians fled to Armenia, of course, but a lot of Armenians fled to Lebanon and fled to Syria and fled to Palestine also. Also Iraq, I think, because I don't know if you can see, but the border here, this border didn't exist. This was all the Ottoman Empire. So when they were getting killed over here and in Smyrna over here, they were running away anywhere they could go, and they had safety in Aleppo, in Beirut. Actually, I lived in very close to an Armenian area called Burj Hamid. I worked in Burj Hamid. I volunteered there. And it's an Armenian area of Beirut, and these Armenians are the Armenians that fled the Turks that were killing them. Or I guess you could say the Ottomans, but this was definitely an ethnic thing between Turks and Armenians. Um, okay, so then in 1919, we have the Egyptian Revolution going against the British occupation. I don't think it was successful yet, but Egypt will get independence. And you will see this throughout the timeline. I included stuff like this because I want you to see a broader, I want you to see some trends that are happening. One trend is that the French and British empires are shrinking, and people are becoming more independent under them. You can see this with the Egyptian Revolution. They were one of the first people to have to fight against the British occupation, and there's definitely a trend of new violence happening. World War I is finished, but in the Arab world, they're creating their countries. They're creating new, I don't know what to call it, national dynamics. And the creation of these things are almost always violent. So you have a lot of riots, you have a lot of revolution stuff. Sometimes you have strikes as well. But if you know about strikes in this time, strikes are not peaceful times. They're not peaceful things that happen. I also wanted to include India because India was really important to the British Empire, and you have similar things happening in India as you do in Egypt, where you have ethnic violence, you have uprisings against the British, stuff like that. And as this continues, there will only be more and more of this kind of stuff. And I want to show you this because I want to show you that th the events of this book are not happening in a vacuum. Palestine is not an island in the middle of nowhere. Palestine is in the middle of all this stuff, and it's influenced by it all, and it's affected also by it all. People are running away from these countries, and they're coming to other countries where ethnic violence is not happening at that moment, but then the influx of those people starts creating ethnic violence. It's like a perpetual cycle of violence in this migration and refugee movement kind of way. All right, so also in 1919, again, this is just a few months after World War I ends, Ataturk and Turkey start to have their own war of independence. So again, this trend of wars and creating new nationalities through violence. The Treaty of Versailles was signed in 1919, and in the Levant, the King Crane Commission is submitted. All right, so now I want to talk about one of my favorite documents ever, and this is the King Crane Commission Survey. I love this document. The reason why is there is no other document like this. This is the only document that asked the Arab people what they wanted for themselves once the Ottoman Empire was gone. There were definitely a lot of, I mean, the trend was definitely going towards Sykes-Picot, but the borders of the modern Middle East had not yet been set in stone, codified, ratified, whatever. They weren't official yet. And some super woke, hippie, liberal people in the, I don't know, during the Treaty of Versailles or during some treaty like this at the end of World War I, said, why don't we ask the Arab people what they want for themselves? Like, what do they want? This was really unpopular, and actually, when the results of the survey started coming in, they they were not very. The results showed that the Arab people they didn't want the British or the French controlling them, so the British and the French immediately put an end to the survey. But what's interesting is the Americans were also involved in making this survey. And the British and the French stopped it, but the Americans continued the survey, which is I'm really, really happy about because we got something from this. Um, but on the other hand, they never released the survey. They never released the results. So the survey finished in 1919, but it wasn't released. It was, I think it was leaked in a newspaper or something like that. Something like in 1922, after the borders of the modern Middle East had been formed. And this, some people think this had something to do with Zionism. It might have. It really, truly might have. It might have had something to do with just no one wanting to release it. I think it had a lot to do with that. But it did get leaked in an American newspaper, I believe. So, uh, another problem with the survey is the number here. And I don't quite understand who was being asked the questions. I don't think there's a record exactly. Maybe I could make some research project from it or something. But it just said the number of petitions received. Are these like very high class elite Arabs? Are these people that are middle class, if there were middle class Arabs back then? Are they people like just people on the street? It's really hard to know who exactly was giving these results. And the numbers are very abysmal. Like 6 people said this, so that means like I don't know. But this is what we got. So let's see what the survey said. This is not the entire survey, by the way. This is just a kind of simplified version of it and I took away some questions that just didn't really have anything to do with Israel, Palestine today, or anything that happened in the book. Okay, so something that I want to clarify in this survey is Syria in this time was not the same thing as modern day Syria. What they meant by Syria in this time is what we would call Greater Syria, which is now what we'd call maybe like the Levant, something like that. Basically, the people that you imagine when you imagine Arab people who are not Saudi or Gulf people. So that means Syria, a lot of Iraq, Lebanon, Palestine, and Jordan, or Transjordan at the time. This is what they mean by Syria. So when they asked Arab people, do you want a united Syria? 80% said yes, which is probably the highest number, highest majority number in this whole survey. Interestingly, for a separate Palestine, not even half of a percent, only 6 people or something said for a separate Palestine. But keep in mind how these questions were perceived and how the answers were meant and things like that. Maybe they meant, yeah, we don't want a separate Palestine because we want a united Syria. I think there was a lot of that going on with some of these answers. So again, for an absolute independent Syria, most said yes. For an independent Iraq, a lot also said yes. And interestingly, again, independence for all the Arab countries, This was really unpopular. I don't know why. It's obviously something to do with the question or some. I mean, like, maybe they meant, no, we don't want every little place to be an Arab country. We want one big country. Maybe it was something like that. That's my guess anyway. Interestingly, here, uh, democracy as a democratic kingdom was pretty popular. It was like neck and neck with having Faisal as a king. This is probably why the French just shut this survey down immediately, because they fought against this happening, Faisal as a king. Uh, so I don't know what a democratic kingdom is. I don't know if the Arabs at the time or even the survey makers knew what a democratic kingdom was, because almost nobody wanted a democratic representative government, which is very, very interesting. And it lines up with how the Middle East is now. If you go to Iraq, if you go to Syria, you won't find very many people saying, yeah, we want democracy. They just want someone that will stop all the conflict and just let them live their lives, basically, which would be like a king. Um, this is also really interesting. So there were a lot of Arab people that said that we should be protecting the rights of minorities. The Middle East today is very minority unfriendly and very minority heavy, which is why we see so much conflict. Uh, Arabic as an official language, not even a 1/2 of 1%. I think that's really interesting as well, and I have no idea. It's hard to imagine, but the survey 100 years ago, they didn't like this idea. I really don't know why, but it's very, very interesting. Um, I don't know what this is. The abolition of foreign capitulations, 53%. A lot of people wanted that. I don't quite understand what it is, but that's interesting. And also, I left this in again, something about the way the questions were asked. Autonomy for all the provinces of Syria, only 1% wanted that. I don't know. Really, really fast for a British mandate, only 3.5% of people wanted that. Only 14.5% wanted a French mandate, and only 3% wanted an American mandate. And what did the Arabs get? They got this. They got a British mandate and a French mandate. And later on, for a few years, they got an American mandate with Iraq. So, yeah, very unpopular, and that's what happened. Another very unpopular thing, and this is really, really, really important to the book, and this is why I included the survey in the first place. Uh, so, all this Zionist stuff for a Jewish state and immigration to Palestine, or whatever the Jewish state would be, um, 0.5% said, yeah, that seems like a good idea. Another 0.5% had some for some other Zionist kind of thing, and almost everyone, 73%, 72% were against this Zionist idea. And guess what happened? This one, the one everyone was against. So again, a lot of things that the Arab people don't want happening in their own country, in their own land, happened. Like exactly the opposite of what they wanted is what happened. And definitely they weren't happy about it. So that's how we begin. That's how the timeline begins. The Arab people don't want a bunch of stuff to happen. They don't want control of the British, the French. The Turkish people don't want the French controlling them either. And that's what they get. Except the Turkish people are able to fight back. The the Arabs, not so much. So, but they try. They try, as you see here, and eventually they will succeed. Um, Also in India, we're getting independent movement in India. We have Gandhi starting. Now, also at the beginning of this time is when we have the third Aliyah, and the Aliyahs are just the waves of immigration, the waves of Jewish immigration coming to Palestine. Most of the Jews here are coming to Palestine from Eastern Europe because of the crazy stuff going on in Russia. It's becoming the Soviet Union now. A lot of conflict, a lot of anti-Jewish stuff is going on there, and these numbers are so small. but at the time, these were some pretty big numbers. Turkey has the War of Independence. By the way, this war, 500,000 people died in this war, and that's not including the Armenian genocide or other ethnic conflicts. This is the war for independence so that they can be not under control of the British and the French, basically, not under the control of whatever Ottoman Empire is trying to cling to life. So, yeah. Syria fights back against the French. They declare themselves independent. It doesn't work though. Iraq also does the same. They declare themselves independent. And yeah, only because of superior British Air Force or air power, air support, are the British able to quell this rebellion. But it was a big rebellion. 6,000 to 10,000 Iraqis died. Iraqi Arabs died. So yeah, this was a big deal. Um, Lebanon begins. In the survey, there was a question about, do you want Syria and Lebanon to be separate? Most people said no. So what do the French do? They make Syria and Lebanon separate. Uh, Something that the Jews are starting to create their own maybe culture, or you can say something like that, back in Palestine. Uh, the French are able to defeat the Arabs in Syria and retain control of Syria. Lebanon again created, and the French also create some other little states. They create an Alawite state, which is a different kind of religion. It's still Muslim, but different. They also create a Druze state, which is also a different ethnicity and religion in Syria. Um, so yeah, this is when a Jewish paramilitary organization first gets created, the Haganah. We're in 1920 now. And now we start to get some riots between Jews and Muslims. It's very hard to talk about who was fighting who at this time because uh, a lot of Jews were still Arab Jews in this time, like a lot of the Jews in Palestine. And were these, but yeah, so it's hard to say. So you could say Muslims versus Jews, but even that gets confusing. Again, more independent stuff coming from India, and the French do not, they succeeded in retaining Syria, but not the area of Turkey that they wanted. Now we get into the pan-Arab nationalism. And pan-Arab nationalism was basically the idea of, okay, obviously the French and British want to break us apart, but as Arabs, like I'm talking as an Arab, but we Arabs do not want to be broken apart. We want our own independent Arab country. And this was a pretty radical idea because the Arabs were not united until then. And even in this time, they were not united. And you will see in the book how not united these people are. They're not like now, in this time, you can say maybe like a Iraqi Arabic guy will meet an Iraqi Syrian person, and they will kind of say, yeah, I guess we're like kind of the same people. We both speak Arabic. We're both Arab people. But 1920 people didn't think like that at all. This was a very new idea to think that just because you speak Arabic means you are an Arab person. And there were so many different cultures, so many different tribes, so many different dialects of Arabic even. So this was a really big deal. And I could talk forever about the creation of pan-Arab nationalism. But a really simple concept of that was also happening in Turkey, which was succeeding in Turkey, and that's how Turkey was becoming independent from the French. They decided they are not just a bunch of tribes of Turkish people, they are one Turkish people. Everyone speaking Turkish is Turkish. And this is also why you have the genocides against the Armenians, fights with the Kurds, things like this, because it's kind of some kind of fascism or something as well. Um, in one side, it's a nice idea because everyone is uniting together and wanting to be independent as one brotherhood of Turks or one brotherhood of Arabs. On the other hand, this is kind of like some fascist stuff, and if someone is not Arab, if someone is not Turkish, what does that mean? Oh, it means that they shouldn't be in our country. This is now Turkey. It's a Turkish country. So either kill them or like send them away or something, as long as they're not in the country anymore. So you have this, I don't know, two sides of the same coin of nationalism. All right, and that's just 1920. So 1921, we know about this, the Cairo Conference. So all that happened before the Cairo Conference, by the way. You have more riots happening in Palestine. And again, now you can kind of see a context of what's going on. You have Arab nationalism, and at the same time, you have new Jews from Europe coming into Palestine. So now these are obviously not Arab people. So there's going to be some kind of conflict. Like, look at what's happening in Syria, look at what's happening in Turkey. So this is also beginning to happen in Palestine. Um, Also, at this time, Transjordan was created, and King Faisal, he was trying to become the king of Syria, but actually the British had him become the king of Iraq instead. And then you have other Jewish stuff going on in Palestine, like little by little, the Jews are establishing themselves more. We have a Druze, not Jewish, Druze states, very different than Jewish, being created. And again, this is like a new nationalism idea. Okay, if there's Arab people, then there's also Druze people, and they should have their own country. So this is kind of the idea. And these things, they pop up from time to time. When I was living in Lebanon, you can go to neighborhoods, and they're all Druze. They're Druze neighborhoods, and they date back, I think, around the time of the Lebanese Civil War, which dates back to the creation of the Druze state. So these things, they last. They have deep roots, and they spring up and create, renew conflicts, renew things. Yeah, there's also, again, this is coming from the nationalism. They're now, okay, if the Turks are one nation, so are the Kurds. So you're getting this kind of nationalistic idea. Keep that in mind when you're seeing the things going on in Palestine. This pan-Arab nationalism or Kurdish nationalism, Turkish nationalism, from a very broad, like if you really step back, you can see it being all these people deciding to become one group, all the Turks becoming one group of Turks. When you zoom in, what you get is a lot of power struggles. Who's going to be the king of the Turks? Who's going to be the dictator? Who's going to be the main person? So when you're looking at what's going on in Palestine in this book, keep that in mind. This is something, a lot of things going on there are something to do with the Arab nationalism, but on a micro level, there's a lot of conflict between the Arabs deciding who's going to be the top guy. Uh, at the very, very end of this, the top guy is Nasser, but this is going way, way ahead. Okay, then, yeah, as I was saying, lots of nationalist movements. Also, again, about nationalism, there's another interesting idea. So the Arabs, they wanted to become one group, one Arab nationalist group, pan-Arab group. The French and the British had a different idea. They said, okay, nationalism is a great idea. We want that. But let's do it within the borders. So all Lebanese people are Lebanese and they're different from all Syrian people. They're different than Egyptian people. And this way, they are not trying to create one country. They're in their own country. They started promoting like Lebanese culture. There was no Lebanese culture before. It was Arabic culture. It was the culture of the village. But now they're talking about Lebanese culture, like as if it had always been there. Interestingly, at the same time, you get a lot of archaeological discoveries happening at this time. And these discoveries are quote unquote backing up the Lebanese culture. So, for example, they started uncovering biblos in Lebanon, And Byblos has a lot of history that's a little bit different than the history of Syria. So they started saying, look, Lebanon, this is your history. People living in Lebanon, Byblos is your history. Look at this history we're finding. And you are now Lebanon. So that sounds great and all, but that's what's happening in Palestine as well. And then when you have new people coming, people who are not Palestinian coming, now you start to get this conflict because you have people saying, we are Palestinian, which is something I'm sure everyone can relate to these days. People saying, we are Palestinian, we do not accept foreign people coming to our country. So this can also create a lot of conflict by having this idea of nationalism within a border, not just like everyone is Arab. No, only Palestinians are Palestinian. This is the beginning of this kind of idea. Um, so in Egypt, they also declared themselves independent, and it worked. This was a huge deal. This is now the city of Izmir, a place I also lived, actually. And when I lived there, I volunteered with refugees in an area called Basmane. And Basmane had a lot of empty houses. And these houses are where the Syrian refugees moved into. And I wasn't sure what the story about these houses were. But later on, I found out that Izmir was a very Greek city. And the Turks basically killed all the Greeks or made all the Greeks leave. And a lot of Armenians fled to Izmir also, and a lot lived in Izmir. And the same thing happened to the Armenians. So I don't know what the area of Basmane used to be, but it was most likely Armenian or Greek, which is something very sad. But yeah, 100,000, no one knows exactly how many people died. It's a very long story of uh, Izmir, but there was a couple of genocides that happened at the exact same time on the exact day by the Turks against the Greeks and the Armenians, and the whole city caught on fire and burned to the ground as well. It's a crazy, crazy situation. Ottoman Sultanate finally died. It died in the Izmir was the last. Izmir was the death of the Sultanate. Also, talking about discoveries, archaeological discoveries. Look, you have Tutankhamun was discovered in Egypt, and now there's a lot of Egyptian nationalism, and the Egyptians still have so much pride in Tutankhamun. Um, so yeah, keep that in mind about nationalism. So finally, in 1922, the British Mandate of Palestine begins. And you can see here the British were planning through their mandates from all the way from Haifa, which is on the coast, to Baghdad, to Cairo, having this railway. And actually, I went to Baghdad once and I saw some of the remnants of this railroad. They are basically like roundabouts. You'd say in British roundabouts. And there are these like pillars that were supposed to hold up a railway that would be like an elevated railway above the city of Baghdad. And all that's left is these cement pillars that everyone is driving around, and it creates a lot of actually crazy traffic situations. But yeah, there was this idea by the British, but it never worked out to build this railway. Could you imagine now if there was this railway? That'd be so cool. All right, Turkey finally is created. So here, the nationalism for the Turks anyway worked out really, really well because they saved their country. Uh, didn't work out for the Armenians and Kurds though, but it worked out for the Turks. And oh, and the Greeks, by the way. There were a lot of Greeks that lived in Turkey at this time. What happened to them? They all were either killed or ran away to Greece. And now Greece has a lot of the um, and what is the word? Greece, a lot of descendants of the Greeks that used to be kind of like Turkish Greeks, I guess you could say. The Greeks that used to live in Turkey, they came to areas like where I live, where I'm recording this right now, in a small city called Saris. This city has a lot of empty mosques and a lot of empty houses, and these were the Turks that used to live here. Actually, they were the Muslims, and they here in Greece they called them the Turks and made them leave, or killed them, and they ran away to Turkey. So they call this the population exchange. This is a very, very, very nice euphemism for a lot of massacres and a lot of people just running for their lives to either Turkey or to Greece. Um, then, once Ataturk uh, created the country of Turkey, the Republic of Turkey, not a kingdom or anything like this, he decided to make it a modern country. And he did a lot of things to modernize it. You might see some of this kind of stuff happen with Palestine in the book. The British might also be influenced by Ataturk's reforms. Ataturk was very influenced by the West, and I think the West was kind of influenced by him as well, when it came to the mandates anyway. So you can see maybe even the Arabs, like the elite Arabs, looking at what Ataturk is doing, looking at how the nationalism worked out well for him, and wanting to implement it themselves. And this was an era where there was a lot of violence, but also there was a lot of possibility too. So what Jerusalem could become and what Palestine could become, it was really like there was a lot of possibility. There was a lot of things going either way. One of the reforms was the caliphate was abolished by Ataturk. So basically, there was no more. Oh, I don't even want to get into it. Uh, so you can see here, so while Ataturk is modernizing his country, you can see that in Jordan, which is an area that is very, very, very remote and desert, and the people there are very nomadic. They're the Bedouin people. They're like what you imagine in Lawrence of Arabia, the people with the camels walking across the desert, going from oasis to oasis, trading. So there's this idea to modernize them and to settle them, put them in villages, make them modern people, put them in school, things like that. I mean, this is a global movement to do stuff like this, but this is also happening in the Middle East, and you might see some of this happen in Palestine. The Jews are doing this for themselves in Palestine, and you can see the Palestinians are also starting to do stuff like this for themselves, whoever the Palestinians are at this time. Meanwhile, more Jews are coming with the fourth Aliyah, which was also called the Grabsky Aliyah. Now we have double the amount of Jews coming than before. So first there were 40,000, then the next wave of Jews is 80,000 on top of that 40,000. And this was named after Grabsky, who was the Prime Minister of Poland, who did some bad things against the Jews, basically. And so now 70% of these Jews are coming from Poland. And you can look at this area. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on. I don't think I'd want to move here. So you can imagine how bad it was in Europe that Jews would want to be coming to this crazy situation. Okay. Oh, I think there's a mistake here. It repeats itself. All right, so then in 1925, this is when Saudi Arabia was created. It actually took a lot longer than in 1925, but who cares? We're not talking about Saudi Arabia that much. Then another Turkish uprising, sorry, a Kurdish uprising. The Kurds also wanted their own country, just as everyone else gets their own country. They want their own country because the Turks are not allowing them to have their own culture, and they need to have their own country to protect themselves. So they have all these rebellions all the time, but they don't work, and they don't work because of infighting, because they're fighting each other too. And you will see this in the book. The Palestinians have a kind of intifada or whatever you want to call it, and it also falls apart because they're fighting each other as well. Because they don't consider themselves one group of people. The Kurds now consider themselves more or less one group of people, kind of, but at this time, no, they were a bunch of tribes that just kind of reacted to the pressures that the Turks were putting on them. And it wasn't enough. And the Palestinians, same situation. It was like they had something going, but it all broke apart because of infighting. So yes, a lot of Kurds were killed in this time, and it all fell apart, and the Turks kind of took them over again. Another revolt in Syria against the French, and look at, I mean, this is a lot of people who were killed. And look at the the difference between these numbers. Maybe 6,000, maybe 100,000. You can see here, people, the records, the numbers, like, don't trust the numbers that much. Who knows how many people were killed, but a lot. It was a really big deal, and it was really sad for a lot of people. Finally, in 1927, we start to get interest in oil. Oil starts to be discovered in the Middle East. And I want to bring up the oil because the oil was not a big deal. And I want to show you that it was not a big deal when it came to Zionism. The Jews are not coming to Palestine to steal all the oil or something like that. Whatever conspiracy theory about that. Just as in my other video, I was talking about how the Sykes-Picot was not about the France and England stealing the oil from the Arab people. Oil just wasn't so important until around now, 1927. Now oil starts being discovered in these areas. Another rebellion, another Kurdish rebellion. More Kurdish, bad things happening to the Kurdish. The British are wanting to modernize Palestine again, so we have this modernization again in Haifa. Another rebellion, not against the British or the French, but against the Saudis in what's now Saudi Arabia. Another thing that happens on the in the same vein as Pan-Arabism, you have the Muslim Brotherhood, the creation of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. And anyone who studies the Middle East knows about the Muslim Brotherhood. They're a really big deal, and to this day they're a very big deal. And they're kind of like some kind of pan-Arab movement, but maybe pan-Muslim Arab movement or something kind of like that. But they were a big deal. And again, it's just about this sort of grouping, mass grouping of people that have never met each other before. It's not about tribes so much anymore as it is about trying to make a new identity, to basically have independence, have their own life. So yeah, the Turkish language is now being codified. You also see this in the Arab world. The Arabic language is now being codified, so they're trying to make a standard Arabic language. The Jews also are trying to make a standard Jewish language, which will later become Hebrew. So, okay, more Palestinian riots. And now we're in 1929, the crash of Wall Street, the Great Depression. India, again, is demanding independence. Again, everything in this time is about independence, independence, independence. And keep in mind, these conflicts, so like how many conflicts have I talked about in the for this one decade from 1920 to 1930? A lot, a lot, a lot of conflicts. I don't know, 10 maybe? And every time there's conflict, there's movement of people. There's refugees. And when there's refugees, when there's movement, when those people move to a new place, it's going to create conflict, more conflict, as I was talking about before. Something that is very controversial, and I don't think I've ever read anything about it, is what's going on with Palestine during all this time. Yes, there's a little bit of conflict in Palestine, but not like in Turkey, not like in Syria, not like in Iraq, where there's like tens of thousands of people being killed. So these people are undoubtedly moving to Palestine. And these people, are they now joining the movement, you could say, against the Jewish immigration? Who are these people? So, but this is very, very controversial because then you can say, well, that means that the Palestinians today, in 2024, were just refugees to begin with, in the first place, refugees. So people don't talk about this kind of stuff so much because it's not easy to find data, real, actually true data on it, and it just makes things, it just goes to a level of confusion that's just so hard to think about. But for sure, this kind of stuff was happening at the same time. So yes, a lot of Jews were coming in as refugees to Palestine, and as you can imagine, I'm sure a lot of refugees from Arab countries were coming to Palestine as well. Armenians also, for example. Okay, speaking of Jewish refugees, we have the fifth Aliyah, and this is now getting into really big numbers. This is like a quarter of a million Jews are suddenly coming. This is, if we looked at the demographics before, okay, uh, like 84,000 to 175,000, that's like doubling. That's a lot of new people. That's a lot of demographic change. Now we're talking about on top of this, like 300,000 more Jews coming. This is asking for conflict. This is really putting a lot of stress on this area, which is already a bit of a stressful area. This is, by the way, this is because of, so 60,000 are coming from Germany because of the rise of Nazism. The rest are still coming from Poland and Eastern Europe, basically. A few are coming from the Arab countries as well. Um, so yeah, there's rebellions going on in Saudi Arabia. There's peaceful. The only peaceful thing in this whole timeline is Gandhi. Peaceful salt march in India. Although I don't think it was. I don't think the British made it peaceful. And then so now we're getting into like real independence kind of stuff. So Iraq finally is going to become a real independent country. The British just can't hold on to it anymore. They're already losing India, so they're definitely going to be losing Iraq. They're definitely going to be losing this whole area. And think about what that means for Palestine. They're going to be losing Palestine as well. And the Arabs, I mean, the people in the areas, they're not stupid. They know what's going on. They see the French and the British losing control. They see people around them getting independence. And they know that the empires are weakening, just a few years before the Ottoman Empire collapsed. Why not the British Empire collapsed too? So they're getting excited about this, basically. Um, okay, more Zionist stuff. Paramilitary organization uh, being founded. Um, so Iraq becomes its own country. It's still like friends with the British, and it's still very controlled by the British, but theoretically it's its own country. And now we're starting to get into the development of the oil industry in Iraq. 1933, just for context, Hitler is now an official government person, and there's still these racial, nationalist, anti whatever riots and massacres and things like that. So you get the massacre of the Assyrian people in Iraq. Now there is a general strike in Palestine by the Arabs in 1933 and more conflict in Saudi Arabia, this time with Yemen, which is not a country yet, by the way. Um, Meanwhile, Turkey is becoming more and more modern. So in 1934, women have the right to vote. If you can imagine what's going like, look at the difference between Saudi Arabia and all these countries in conflict. Meanwhile, you have this quote unquote successful nationalist movement that created a country, and they're modernizing, they're becoming a real, basically European country. To this day, Turkey is still trying to become, there's still like a movement for Turkey to become part of the EU. Syria is never going to become part of the EU, but you can see, like, at this time, people don't know that yet. They think, okay, yeah, like, maybe the whole region can become modern. So, yeah. Um, just for context, this is when Persia becomes Iran, and more now we're really getting into Jews being in trouble in Germany and coming to Palestine. Most are not coming to Palestine, by the way. A lot are coming to the US, to England, but Palestine, uh, some, not a lot compared to the ones going to America, but some are coming to Palestine. Now we get oil in other countries, not just Iraq, also in Bahrain. Now this is what the book is talking about. Now finally we get to the book. So 1936, this is like a big deal now. More ethnic conflict, more nationalist conflict, more intertribal conflict. Also in Egypt, the same kind of conflict kind of stuff is going on in Egypt. And the Druze states fall apart, they become part of Syria. Again, going back to the nationalist movement, all the people of Syria should be one Syrian people, that kind of thing. Now oil is discovered in Qatar. So along with Iraq, now Egypt, independent country, is joining the League of Nations. So now you have Egypt, you have Iraq joining the League of Nations, obviously becoming their own countries. So why not Palestine, for example? Um, Oil is now discovered in Kuwait. Now we have more bad things happening to the Jews. Here's Kristallnacht. Now things are getting towards the end of this timeline and the end of the context of the book. So this is basically the beginning of World War II. So the Germans occupy Czechoslovakia. The writing is on the wall for a lot of Jews, and now they really got to get out of Europe because obviously Hitler is going to try to invade, and obviously he doesn't want the Jews there. Um, Bad timing. Bad timing. So yeah, while this is happening, the British don't allow Jews to come to Palestine anymore. And they also in America are not really allowing the Jews to come to America anymore. And I'm not so sure about England, but the Jews basically have nowhere to go. Palestine as like a plan C, maybe, for a lot of Jews, and even that is now closed. Why is it closed? Because of the events of the book, because of this sort of intifada that happens starting in 1936 up here, but continues until 1939. And then we have World War II stuff happening. So Italy invades Albania, which has implications in the Middle East. Then the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was signed, and then obviously Germany invades Poland, and World War II begins. And yeah, so this is just a little bit more demographic information. So you can see here the different aliyahs. So I think this is the third aliyah. 40,000 Jews come, then double that, and then, I don't know, my math is bad, maybe quadruple that or something like that to 250,000. So you can see the waves of Jews are really going higher and higher. Here's this graph here I found that goes way further on, but I just, for the context of the book, cut it here. So you have the waves of immigration, which is interesting. It really dies down around this time, but then it, of course, spikes up as the Nazis and pogroms and anti-Semitic stuff really go into full swing. And then you can see it dies here because the British don't let any more immigration into Palestine. And by the way, the source for these numbers right here, not the timeline, but these numbers, is Sergio Della Pergola, and he has a lot of interesting information about that. So if you got this far, congratulations. You now have a lot of context of this book. Palestine was not just an island. This stuff happening was not just happening because of things going on in Palestine. It was happening because it was happening everywhere in the Middle East, especially in this area. And people were looking at what was going on around them, and they were basically just doing the same as what was going on around them. But you do have something that's different, which is the Jews and the Zionist movement. People coming to in huge numbers coming to one small area of the Middle East. The only thing I can think of that was like that was maybe the Armenians coming to Lebanon and Syria, but they didn't come in these huge numbers. And the Armenians were kind of Middle Eastern compared to the Jews coming from Europe. So there is this difference, but there was still a lot of the same stuff that was going on between the new immigrants, Jewish immigrants, and the maybe old Palestinians, or maybe a lot of these people were refugees from conflicts all over. I mean, you have to imagine this was all the Ottoman Empire before. These borders didn't exist before. There was a lot of fluidity going on. So, in short, what is the takeaway of all this? I don't know. I don't think there is a short takeaway of all of this, but I wanted to give you a context of what was going on around Palestine. Not just this happened in Jerusalem and this riot happened in Jerusalem and in Jerusalem, because you need to know that this was going on everywhere around as well. Each place had their own unique conflict and unique reasons for the conflict, but the overall reasons and the overall era was an era of violence and nationalism forming, fascism forming, racism and genocide all over the place, people running away, people becoming stronger, a lot of power struggles. There's a lot going on, and it's not just in Palestine. But what's going on in Palestine is definitely reflecting what's going on all around them as well. So definitely, I'm not going to make every video this long. Hopefully the next video I make is going to be like 5 minutes long or something. But the context for this book is really important to understand on a broad picture level. Is broad picture a real word? I don't know. I'm getting tired. I'm going to go to bed. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. I'm really amazed if you got this far, and I will see you in the next much shorter video. All right, have a good night, everyone.